Those stories shortly, but first tonight. For a free market Liberal government, the Turnbull team is certainly intervening heavily in Australia's energy market. Today, it summoned the boss of AGL to Canberra over the company's plans to close a major coal-fired power station. The government wants to keep electricity reliable and affordable, but is keeping open this particular coal station a good idea for Australia's long-term economic and environmental future? AGL itself doesn't think so. In a moment, I'll be joined by the former United Nations climate chief. But first, political correspondent David Lipson has more from Canberra.
It's becoming a fixture of the parliamentary sitting calendar.
Andy Vesey, would you willingly sell Liddell Power Station?
Excuse us.
Energy executives summoned to join Canberra's rough and tumble.
Looking forward to having constructive conversations. Thank you.
AGL boss Andy Vesey is the latest to face a smackdown. Hounded from the boardroom all the way to Parliament House over his company's plans to close down its Liddell coal power station in 2022.
I know green activists have infiltrated layers of government, but I didn't realise they'd reached the top levels of corporate Australia.
Malcolm Turnbull should stop bullying AGL into prolonging the life of an ageing coal-fired power station.
Like the butterfly effect in reverse, wild storms half a world away are causing a flurry of hot air in Canberra.
This is a wake-up call for the climate deniers in this government.
Hurricanes are beating down on the Americas, and Barnaby Joyce's only answer is coal.
For the National Party to propose going backwards on renewable energy is one of the seriously dumbest ideas to emerge out of Canberra in a very long time.
At its federal conference yesterday, the Nationals agreed to reject the centrepiece of the government-commissioned Finkel report, a clean energy target leading to 42% renewables by 2030. Under the Nationals' motion, the makeup of clean energy would go no higher than 23%.
But that's it. No more. We lock it off at 23%. We've honoured everything that we've committed to.
Ron Boswell retired from Parliament 3 years ago, but where he leads, the rank and file still follow.
The electricity pricing is getting out of control, and someone's got to do something about it, and that someone should be the National Party.
He wants existing commitments on renewables honoured, but beyond 2020, an end to all government subsidies, including the Finkel-modelled clean energy target.
I don't think Australia can afford it. I don't think food manufacturing and food processing can afford it. It's hitting the abattoirs. It's hitting every farm that turns on a pump or an irrigator. It's hitting every small business person that's got fridges in their shops.
And over the weekend, the National Party reminded everyone why we're in this crisis. Internal divisions, ideological obsessions are stopping this government getting on with the job of putting good energy policy in place.
We certainly respect decisions and recommendations, resolutions from our various party conferences, but policy is determined by the members of Parliament here.
As Malcolm Turnbull points out, the Nationals' motion is non-binding, so it's more of a guide than official party policy. But the internal resistance to the clean energy target from the junior coalition partner is now out of the shadows and in full view. It serves as a blunt reminder of what's at stake for a Prime Minister who once lost his leadership over his climate and energy policy.
I want Malcolm Turnbull to win the next election because I think he's the best person that can lead this nation into some sort of prosperity. So what happened 9 years ago happened 9 years ago. And I think it would be just suicidal for a coalition to drop a leader at the moment.
In the meantime, the government continues to edge towards more assistance for coal. An announcement today will see taxpayer funds freed up to provide loans to coal and resource export projects left high and dry by the reluctance of big banks to back them.
We've seen, for example, the stepped-up campaigning of activist groups which are discouraging our major retail banks from financing otherwise viable exporters in the coal sector.
As with the Adani mine and AGL's Liddell coal plant, the government is increasingly going where big business dare not, by investing in fossil fuels.
We've seen a decade of complete policy chaos around energy, so it's a big ask to ask for an investor to put money into coal at a time when there's real uncertainty about what energy policy, especially directed towards coal, will be.
But according to the Australian Industry Group, concerns about climate are on the back burner.
The industry is, quite frankly, fairly agnostic about where the power comes from at the moment at a time of spiralling prices and real issues around reliability. Industry just needs to know that there's affordable, available energy at the time that they need it. That's the most important thing.
We see a role for every form of generation.
And so intervening on behalf of energy customers is now the MO of a PM who used to talk up the free market.
What are the values and core beliefs that will be the foundation for all of the policies that your government comes up with?
Well, this is a Liberal national government. It is a free market government.
Inconsistencies aside, what does it all mean for your power bills? The PM is now claiming credit for a reduction in wholesale gas prices. We're yet to see if that'll flow onto households. And energy companies are now being forced to fess up if they can offer you a better deal. Overall, the jury is still out on policy, but Malcolm Turnbull seems confident he's on top of the politics, having successfully drawn Labor back onto the energy battlefield.
Since the 2013 election, have power prices gone up or down?
The Leader of the Opposition, or Blackout Bill, as many Australians...
It was ruled out of order, but the PM's smile said it all.
And the United Nations former climate chief, Christiana Figueres, is in Australia to speak at a Sydney City Council event. She joined me in the studio. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for the invitation.
If I can start with the major domestic energy story in Australia, how surprised are you to see the Australian federal government pressuring AGL to stay in coal?
Well, I am admittedly surprised. Maybe it's because we're down under that things are somewhat upside down, because most governments are actually moving toward lessen their dependency on coal for many different reasons in addition to the environmental. So it is rather surprising. But truth be told, we have two different corporate views here, don't we? We have the AGL corporate view that understands that there is no long-term future for coal, in particular for old plants as this one, and very responsibly is saying it doesn't make any sense anymore, we have to close it down. And then we have another corporate view that is saying, if I get $1 billion from the government, then I can open the largest new mine in Australia, one of the largest in the world. That project or that corporate view, perhaps 50 years ago, it would have made sense, but this is 2017. And they're thinking that they might use that coal for 60 years. How much coal do you think we're going to use in the world by the year 2050 or by the year 2060? It makes no sense.
Are there any major corporations around the world that see coal as a good future investment?
No. There are, obviously those who are invested in coal are trying to extend their life, and that is absolutely understandable. But you see less and less financial institutions being willing to finance, in particular, any new coal because of the liabilities and because they understand any new coal is going to be a stranded asset very soon. So you see less and less support for coal.
We have a debate going on in Australia often about the reliability of renewable energy versus the dependability of coal. What's your thought on that?
Well, it's apples and pears. It's two very different things, because coal, what it provides you is for base load. But the issue that is at hand here, in particular for hot summers, which we will have in Australia, is not about base load. It's about peak demand. And for that, coal is completely incapable of meeting that kind of a demand because it takes a long time to put a coal plant up and back down. So for that, actually, renewable energy, ironically, is the kind of energy that you want. And if in the absence, which is the problem that we have in Australia, that for 10 years we have not had a consistent long-term policy on energy, which would have attracted the kinds of investments that are necessary in Australia. So that is what is necessary.
People who are concerned about the reliability of renewables say things like, well, how can you rely on wind power? Because if it's not windy, you're not going to have wind power.
Yes, and that may be an issue if you have a country that gets to 60, 70% of renewables on the grid, and then you need that kind of a support. But that's not the case, certainly, in Australia. And the rest of the system is still functioning there as a huge battery capacity for renewable energy. And renewable energy is able to be flexible and to actually be responsive to very, very quick changes in demand and in dispatch. And that's the characteristic that you want. Of course, it needs to be dispatchable, but it also needs to be very flexible. That's the kind of energy system that we need. So what Australia should really be moving toward is a much more systemic, integrated planning with a long-term view of what is the energy future in Australia.
And how well do you think the Finkel report tackles those issues you're raising? And if the federal government were to adopt the recommendations of the Finkel report, how far along would it be to meeting the sorts of goals you're outlining there?
Well, admittedly, I think there are some on one side that say that the Finkel report is not ambitious enough, and others that say that the Finkel report is way too ambitious. So if anybody has accused me of, being on both sides, I probably go like, well, maybe the thing is right. What it does, the virtue of the Finkel report is that it really does avoid the ping pong that has been going on here of partisan politics. Energy policy is too important to be a ping pong for partisan politics. So it begins to depoliticize. It gives a long-term direction to where we want to go. And maybe it's not perfect. Nothing is perfect. But it does bring together, apparently, at least broader bipartisan support than anything that we've seen in the past 10 years, and at least is a very good base from which to start, from which to have a long-term perspective, and then to allow this and future governments to calibrate up or down, but at least along an agreed pathway.
2014, 2015 and 2016 were the hottest years on record. Is avoiding...
In the world.
Is avoiding dangerous levels of climate change still possible?
In German, there is a wonderful word called Jein, which is both yes and no. Actually, we are very, very close to not being able to avoid that anymore. We are within 3 years of crossing a threshold that is going to make it very, very difficult to avoid the worst impacts. And we haven't even seen those worst impacts. So whatever we do, in particular, whatever we invest in over the next 3 years is going to be absolutely critical, because that is the energy matrix that is going to either emit or not emit over the next 20 to 30 to 40 years. So we have a very, very short window of opportunity over the next 3 years. And everyone, not just Australia, everyone, every single country really needs to very seriously consider the impacts of the decisions over the next 3 years for the next 100 years.
What impact is the Trump administration's withdrawal from the Paris Agreement going to have on global efforts to rein in climate change?
Well, it's very interesting because, first of all, I'm actually quite grateful to President Trump because I think that his announcement on pulling out of the Paris Agreement has actually started a huge wave of support for the Paris Agreement, certainly within the United States, and as well as abroad. So within the United States, because of his announcement, we now have 9 states, we have 300 cities, and we have 1,000 corporations that have already come forward to say we are still in, because they understand that this is good for their own economic development. They're not doing it because they want to save the planet. They're doing it because they understand this is good for their economic development. Decarbonization strengthens their economy, and they want to continue. Whether the effort of those states or a growing number of states and companies and cities that will join that coalition is going to be enough to actually be able to make up, so to speak, or to fill in the gap of the federal government remains to be seen. What is interesting, however, is the deepened and much broader support that the Paris Agreement has received in the United States.
Christiana Figueres, thank you so much.
Thank you.